Welcome back. You're watching Citizen Extra. Over the last hour, Raila Odinga has been addressing families of victims of police brutality at the city mortuary. He has given them tokens and now puts the figure at 215, the people who have been killed. Of course, this is a disputed figure by the police. He also has told the US off and told them to stop interfering in Kenya's internal affairs, insisting he does not recognize the swearing in of President Uhuru Kenyatta. This is, of course, based on the reason that the US had advised Odinga to shelve his plans for his swearing in that is expected to happen on Tuesday, that is on Jamhuri Day. In studio now I have George Kithi, an advocate, Dr. Lutalala Mkhwana, and Eric Komolo, both advocates. Eric Komolo also an advocacy and development advocate. Thank you all for making time for us this morning. Dr. Lutalala, I'll start with you first. From Raila Odinga's comments, we'll come back to the issue of police brutality, but he has been very strong on the West. And this time we hear Raila Odinga saying Kenya's problems can only be solved locally.
Thanks, Hussein. First and foremost, one needs to understand the context within which Honorable Raila Odinga is making those comments. First and foremost, I think that there's nothing wrong in our foreign partners offering advice, because in the past they have. Indeed, our history is replete with examples of where our foreign partners have intervened when you have been unable to agree, and we've agreed. 2007 is a typical example. We couldn't solve it ourselves until we brought in Kofi Annan and others. But I think the approach seems to be one that will lend more credibility to the Jubilee stand as opposed to Raila's stand. And that's why he has said that if there is any advice, it ought to be given in private. If you look at the newspapers today, there is the American envoy addressing his staff, and there is a screaming headline there which gives the impression that the position of the government is one that the US supports. And you see, there are ramifications to those kind of statements from the US, that they then entrench the position, which as a lawyer say, yes, it's a legality that is settled as far as President Uhuru's election is concerned. But you see, Honorable Raila Odinga has kicked up a political storm. And by the US appearing to say that, look, forget about the swearing in, accept what it is that is in place, but we can dialogue. That resonates with the stand of Jubilee. And therefore, on the face of it, it is bound to antagonize Honorable Raila Odinga. Remember, Hussein, that as we speak now, the swearing in of President Uhuru Kenyatta's president, in my view, having come at the end of a process as mandated by the Constitution, conclusively settled the legal question with regard to President Uhuru's term. And under the relevant article in the Constitution, 140, if I'm not mistaken, or thereabout, the term of his presidency began as soon as he's sworn in and proceeds until when the next person elected under the Constitution takes over. So the issue of the legality of President Uhuru's term is not in question. What is in question, and I think this is what we look at for going forward, is we have legality versus legitimacy. That is where we need to concentrate. And when we talk about legitimacy, therein comes the issue of political acceptability of the Uhuru presidency. And therefore, it is in that context that Raila Odinga is scoffing at the US statements. You must also remember that the US ambassador, Kodek, has not had very good relationship with Honorable Raila regarding this matter of the election. I do not know where he is. I do not know the official position. But if what the social media is saying, that he has since been recalled, I do not know, then the US had better do everything in confidence and diplomatically. If they do what they have done in public, they just serve to entrench the extremities that they already are, because there is perception of them having sided with the government.
Dr. Keith.
Now, you see, I take it up from where he's brought it up. You know, there are two issues that are in a friction. The first is the political dispensation, and the second is the legal. The legal journey to entrenchment, to establishment of government is done. We've come to the end, and therefore there's a government that is running. But there are those political issues that have not been resolved. One of the issues is whether or not the government is legitimately in place. Now that again is a creation of politics as opposed to what the law settles. Now when politics is in friction with the law, there are emergent issues. The emergent issues are what comes first. Is it the politics or the law? Now that's a very important question, because politics is stemming from our social realities. So then how we discuss and talk to each other has an element of how we socialize with ourselves. The ethnic predilections that we seem to host ourselves every day in itself has a political connotation, because that's the political angle that we take. Mm-hmm. The talks that we've had today says that most of the people who are killed are from a certain region. That's a social reality, but it's politics still. Now, look at it this way, right from the beginning, Kenya wasn't there until it was formed. But the people lived in a certain political organizations and the social organizations. By the time we started having the law, we had organized ourselves politically so that then we make the law. By the time we're promulgating the constitution, it stemmed from a political reality and a social reality. So then what comes first? Is it the law or the politics?
The egg or the chicken?
Now when that happens, and that I think is the expression we're having right now.
Correct.
If the law does not serve us or does not serve us adequately, do we then live within the confines of the law, notwithstanding the political friction with the law, or do we then take up our political realities and have the law conform with the political reality that we are in? Mm-hmm. Now, that's a very important situation that we are in today, because the politics of the day seem to be in friction with the law, and yet we seem to be guided by the law, notwithstanding, because the constitution is what we have to follow, and the politics seem to have sidestepped the provisions of some of the provisions of the constitution.
Okay, and we saw, for the record, President Kenyatta, even after saying he'll reach out during his inauguration speech, was very clear that ultimately any decision or any talks will have to be based, or any way to solve any problem in this country has to be done through the law. With that in mind, Dr. Komolo.
Osen, thank you. We are in a very tricky position. We are in a position where our foreign partners seem to believe that once the constitutional requirements in Kenya have been followed, then the society should settle, it should be business as usual. And that ignores, as my two colleagues have said, that ignores the real parameters that are at play in Kenya. The ethnic divisions, what people call historical injustices, but which is narrowing down to more of electoral injustices and all that. Mm. I don't want to spend too much time on what the U.S. Secretary for African Affairs said, because that reflects more about U.S. foreign policy. UN foreign policy, for the most part, masquerades as promoting democracy. But in reality, they look more into global peace and security. They look more into commercial interests of American businesses.
What you're saying, in other words, is you don't think it was right for them to tell NASA and Odinga to shelve?
I don't think it should be given the weight that it seems to be given, because in reality, once things degenerate, they will also move to call for dialogue. They will move to try to align themselves with what is in operation in Kenya. You see, it's even worse that the president is Trump, because then Trump seems to change his positions based on his instincts. And you saw what he did for the Palestinians yesterday. Mm-hmm. So don't give this a lot of weight. Let's focus on what's important. The fact is that elections formally have headed. Another fact is that elections did not settle our real issues. And another fact is that you cannot ignore NASA. So the swearing in my view, on Tuesday, is a way of extending the civil disobedience. And it will be very advisable for the government not to ignore it.
Okay. On that point, let me get Stephen Leto, who's been following what's happening at City Mortuary. Of course, Leto, we saw Raila Odinga eulogizing with the families there of the deceased. If Leto, you can hear me, he was also very clear. Okay, Leto, can you hear me? Right. We don't seem to have Leto, but we'll talk to Leto later on. But as I said, he was very, what you're talking about, was very categorical and dismissing U.S. calls for NASA to stop to shelve the swearing-in plans. When you say it's just an extension of civil disobedience, first, do they base this, or does it have any legal basis? You can all answer that.
It's very clear that when it comes to legality, as Dr. Lutalala said, that is on the side of Uhuru. Everyone knows that. But legality is not legitimacy. So from where I stand, and you see leading a government is a question of fact. So it's a question of controlling the treasury, controlling security forces and all that. That at the moment seems to favor Uhuru. The question is how long it will last, because civil disobedience in the past has brought down governments. But importantly, Uhuru himself is serving his last term. So when you serve your last term, the last thing you want is disruption over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And NASA, from where I stand, has capacity to disrupt it, including what they call boycotts. I know boycotts eventually have impact on the economy, eventually have impact on how people innovate and how people view Kenya. And if the government is not able to you see, stabilize and raise the necessary revenue, then of course we won't have any legacy to talk about. So you can of course have de facto instruments of power, but basically not control the economy.
I'm sure your colleagues want to respond to this, but shortly let's go to Lee Funeral Home. Raila Odinga is now there addressing the media.
We appointed him as our minority leader in Parliament, in the last Parliament, and he performed his duty with a lot of dedication and commitment. He was able to put our members together at sometimes very difficult and challenging times. People say Nyenze was sometimes controversial and so on. Controversy is material with which life is made. So I enjoyed working with him. He was always briefing us as the leadership of NASA, of CORD at that time, for the goings on in Parliament. And I've had very good relationship with him since he was part in Parliament, I think the 8th Parliament, when he was made a minister. So I've known him as a minister, as a backbencher, and also as a leader in Parliament. And I think the people of Kitui West has lost a good representative. The Kenyan people generally and the NASA fraternity have lost a dedicated leader. So the Almighty put his soul in peace, or rest in peace. There have been a number of issues at times when Parliament had to make some very momentous decisions, and he was always able to rally members. As you know, there's always tendencies of the government trying to divide the opposition ranks. That is when you know leadership. Say that the quality of a leader is not where he stands at the times of peace and comfort, but at the times of difficulties and controversy. And I just want to say that in those kind of tests, Mr. Nyenze always proved that he was up to it. Okay.
Right, NASA leader Raila Odinga now mourning Kitui West MP and Kanwera Cabinet Minister Francis Nyenze, who passed away yesterday. Raila was speaking at the Lee Funeral Home. That is before that he was at the city mortuary talking to families of those who were killed during the post-poll running battles during demonstrations between police NASA demonstrations that resulted in chaos between running battles between the NASA supporters and police. Dr. Mukwana, you were responding to Eric Komolo. Will they have any legal basis? Because from what Raila Odinga was talking about today, dismissing the Western powers, and especially the US, clearly this plan is still going on.
Yes, Hussein. And Hussein, as I said, I think if we want to do justice to this discussion, I know that most of us are tired about what happened on the 8th and now 26th, but there is a way in which you cannot entirely stop going back to it. Indeed, Honorable Raila has gone back to it and said he only recognized the decision of the Supreme Court on the 8th, which indeed was a decision that nullified the elections and ordered that a fresh process be commenced. If we are saying, and as a lawyer I say so, that the question of legality of President Uhuru's term was conclusively decided by the swearing in, and now he's properly in office, the next question we should be asking ourselves is, so why is the country restless? If legality is the alpha and omega of this question, why is the country not settled? And the answer lies in the issues that the opposition has raised. A broad spectrum of citizens led by the opposition have said that the process through which the product is the presidency was born was not credible, was not believable, was not justifiable, was not acceptable. The one term that describes all those is called legitimacy. That legitimacy, according to Chambers Cross Dictionary, is believability, is soundness of an action, is justifiability. So, you need to go back to 8th of August. Look at the decision of the Supreme Court and the reasons that they gave. Then look at the fresh process that the IBC embarked on leading up to 26th. And look at the activity that took on the 26th. If all those processes were credible, if they look believable, then the question of legitimacy is resolved.
But who decides what is legitimate?
Thank you. I was going to answer that. If you ask the Jubilee adherents, of course it was believable. It's a yes. If you ask NASA, it's a loud no. And therein lies the elephant in this room called Kenya. Legitimacy has to do with believability, and that has to do with the perceptions. So if a larger section of the country is saying, look, when the audit as ordered by the court was not conducted satisfactorily,
okay,
that was not believable. And therefore the country
it's because of the choice of your words. You say when a larger part of the country.
A large.
Now, I mean, the thing is, both sides claim to have numbers.
Correct.
So we have a problem, isn't it?
Yeah. I think there's another way to look at it. We do have formal institutions and we have history. And in the past, this is not the first election we conducted. In the past, even with irregularities, there's been an element of acceptability. So the next question is, did the elections that took place on the 26th, did it at the very least unite Kenyans the way previous elections have settled disputes that Kenyans have when they compete for elections? And you know, that's not a question of percentage, that's a question of people being comfortable that, look, we did have an election, and this election, at the very least, tried to settle our collective interest.
Okay, gotcha.
I think this could be summarized easily this way, that now, and many years to come, be it 100, be it 200 years, for as long as our system is a democratic system, we will continue to suffer the folly of democracy. Now, why the folly of democracy? I do not think in our African setups, the Kikuyus, the Luos, the Kambas, the Somalis, we had an election as a form of governance. This is an introduction that was brought to us, and we adopted it. We've lived within the confines of 50 years and tested this over time. We've put up a law called the Constitution, which then is what is being tested now. Now, what is democracy? Democracy is such that after every period of time, a cycle revolves. After every 5 years, we are called upon to elect someone, one person, when that person is elected, it is supposed to be a division and a fault line. It is not on the basis of unity. It is on the basis of a fault line. So it is the very opposite of what holds a country together. When an election is called, what happens is we must bias ourselves as against so-and-so, as against and in favor of so-and-so. That bias is not then methodically put, it's not directed by the Constitution. So that then what happens is you can bias yourselves for Raila Odinga because he's a Luo and I'm a Luo. You can bias yourself against Uhuru Kenyatta because he's a Kikuyu, purely within the discretion of the voter. So then when a result is pronounced, it's not going to pronounce that the Kikuyus and the Luos have gone ethnically this way. In fact, the pronouncement won't be Luos have won or Kikuyus have won. It is that the country has elected a leader called so-and-so from a certain ethnic group. But remember, the basis upon which this election was done, in fact, the product is ethnic. And therefore, subsequently, when the result comes, it is an ethnic biased result. If that's correct, then this is what happens. That immediately after that, we still have a group of people who are ethnically biased and ethnically emotionalized against the product. That is what is happening now. So then what do we do? The law is such that we need to move on after the result is completed, meaning we've gone through the court system and a pronouncement has been made and somebody sworn in. But then look at it, what's happening now. What's happening is that then the person who was the main competitor or rival is still holding back with the emotionalized mass that he has, saying we do not recognize the result purely out of that competition. So then what is the fall of democracy? It is democracy presupposes that after the result comes out, notwithstanding the fault lines and the biases that we have, the elasticity of the movement of the people apart from that difference is able to be brought together. So that then we are elastic enough so that we can rebound after the election. But that is not what is happening. It means that the gap was so big such that now bringing us back is through the problems and challenges that we're facing today. So, like it or not, this is a cycle we'll continue to have for as long as democracy presupposes that we must vote based on divisions and fault lines.
Okay, it's an issue that many have failed to agree until now.
Well, I also disagree.
For dialogue. Okay.
Yes, Hussein, yeah, you seem to flag my use of the word larger, and I want to say this. There is no empirical study to show how many people Jubilee has and how many NASA has. But be that as it may, it is sufficient that a section of the country feels that the process was not right, and therefore they are protesting about it. I want to echo what my colleague is saying, but add this way. The fault lines had a basis, and that basis has been crafted by the opposition as being the electoral injustice, and now more than that, it has elicited the very many cries about the old vices which had never been addressed. If this is not the moment when President Uhuru Kenyatta, because he promised that once he's in office he'll be able to dialogue, for me this is not just a moment to dialogue. It is a near constitutional moment, because President Uhuru now has nothing to fear. He's securely in office. He ought to be the statesman who extends his hand in humility and respect and say, what are the issues? Because we're saying, if we say that we shouldn't dialogue, then what are we saying? That the other section of Kenyans who feel that the process was not legitimate, they go to hell? The steps which they have embarked on, which began as demonstrations, have graduated. And if you look at what happened when Honorable Raila was returning, there is a dangerous element that is setting in which is not right. That the youths of this country and NASA followers seem to be slowly moving from peaceful disobedience to near sabotage of the economy. If you look at what happened in Kakamega, between Kakamega and Kisumu, when the citizens went and destroyed the Safaricom mast, that is not civil disobedience. Okay. That is graduating to destruction and sabotage. So whatever it is that President Uhuru Kenyatta thinks about this, and whatever it is that Raila thinks about it, the solution is that these fault lines must be mended, and they'll be mended through a national dialogue forum.
Okay. The flagging of the use of the word larger is because I was saying both sides claim to have the numbers. That was my point. Okay. Finally.
Osen, you know, George has talked a lot about democracy and its fault lines and all that. You see, we can do a lot about democracy and theory and law. But the bigger point here is that we've set up a constitution sets up institutions, and these institutions are expected to work along certain lines. If the perception is that they don't work, then you have the questions of legitimacy that are now coming up. And it's even worse that the government seems to overreact to them. Particularly when the NASA group, for example, when Raila was coming back, totally overreact and lead this to a point where they might not be able to control. I took time to trace how Boko Haram came about in northern Nigeria. And initially it was all largely a peaceful kind of demonstration based on people who felt neglected here and there. And then there was overreaction by instruments of the state, including the army of Nigeria. What has happened, and you saw it in Chiromo, what has happened is that security forces have increasingly profiled the people from, say, Nyanza or other areas or NASA supporters. And then these people first become radicalized. And once they become radicalized, you need to look at Boko Haram again, arms start coming in. Kenya is not unique. Let's not think that Kenya is unique, that Kenya cannot go to a state of lawlessness, and that NASA supporters and NASA leaders do not have options, including armed struggle. This has happened elsewhere. It's not something we want, but it's an option that everyone wants to avoid.
It's not something they've talked about. Plus, again, everybody, I mean, you're within your rights to make those comments, but again, the police denies this. The police denies that sections of this country, I'm just setting for the record, that the police denies that there are sections of these countries that have been profiled, and that these numbers are, as the opposition put, the numbers of those people.
There are not many people in this world who believe that Kenya police is the most objective institution.
Okay, I will come back to the issues of police brutality shortly. Let's go over to Kisumu County. We join Laura Otieno, where there has been a workers' demonstration. Do we have Laura? Workers?
Can I talk? Yes, thank you very much, Hussein. And we are at the East African Breweries Limited here in Kisumu, where this crowd has been here all the way since 6 a.m. basically to decry what they say was lack of inclusivity in giving out casual jobs. Well, Hussein, sometime in July, on the 16th of July specifically, the president was here and he commissioned the groundbreaking of the setting up of a plant that was going to boost beer production, and the specific brand was Senator Keg. And what he said was that the putting up of this industry, or rather the revamping of the brewery here, was going to create 110,000 jobs, both directly and indirectly. Now, what we understand is that 600 of those jobs are casual or non-skilled kind of jobs. And what these people have come here to do was to say that they have information that some people are being brought from other places to come and work here. And we had seen a contingent of officials sent from the governor's office. The deputy governor was here. The CEC, the Minister for Planning and Economic Development, was also here, basically trying to tell the residents to come together and form a sort of list that is they're going to put rather list their skills, and then they relate to the company. And of course, we work with the company officials. Chance to have come here, having walked out from that is what there are still discrepancies among themselves. They're trying to agree amongst themselves. Of course, we will be talking to them and we're bringing you the latest from this place, Hussein.
Much Laura Atieno telling us, giving us an update from Kisumu County. Will be joining her later on. Back to my panel, of course. Let's go back to the issue, the substantive issue initially, where Raila went to city mortuary. There's been this back and forth about police brutality. First, what has been your assessment of how police have been handling the demonstrations? Let me start with you, George.
There are mixed gains and losses for the police in terms of it's called upon to maintain peace. There are very many instances, obviously, that demonstrations have gone peaceful, preceding the election and after the election. But remember, the context of humanity is such that, notwithstanding how good an employee you've been, the day you steal for the first time, that's the day you go home, notwithstanding you've sat for 45 years. Because that is not what it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to have stolen in the first place. So if the police do something good, but then a day comes when they miss it, and they mishandle a demonstration, a procession, and then people are killed, certainly, yes, the public is going to react. Now, this should be looked upon with a statement from the president when he complimented them for how they conducted themselves in the preceding period before the time that he made the comment. That's before the election, and probably how they handled the election and thereafter. Now, that is a cocktail of issues. One of the issues, of course, the president as commander-in-chief has to keep on encouraging his forces and rally them together to perform the duties as they do. Certainly, he's not the first person who should be condemning them. But, you know, there are on the side issues. A human right abused for one person or 10 persons could be very few people if you looked at it as against the 40 million Kenyans. But then those are lives that exactly must be protected by the Constitution.
The reverse can also be argued.
That is true. That is true. Put it this way, that every human person in this country is protected under the Constitution. Any abuse to one person is condemnable. There are very many police officers who are brothers, sisters, and parents who are doing a very good job. Those don't take bribes, those that will not kill any person, that don't shoot anybody. Now, those are there. But are those that within the heat of the moment will be trigger happy, will then exercise their powers as are given to them, either through an order or through their instinct.
Okay.
Now, that is still condemnable. So what we are trying to say here is that yes, we cannot fail to realize that deaths have occurred on occasion by the police force and must be condemned and must be investigated. Will these deaths stop occurring? I think they'll continue to occur for as long as there's friction. The first thing we should do is avoid the friction in the first place, because that is the occasion upon which this happens.
There have been deaths. I mean, where we have an issue is about the numbers. Police disputing the numbers being given by the support by NASA. But it's a fact, and you actually acknowledge that there are people who are killed by the police.
Yes.
But from what you witnessed over the last few recently, over the last few weeks, in terms of police demonstrations, do you think the government health matters? And Raila Odinga talked about it today when he said not a single person in government has recognized that there have been people who have been killed and talked about these families. Do you think the government has health matters with how it has dealt with
this is unfortunate, because you see what the police force as was reformed in the Constitution, at least by the text of the Constitution, is not a police force, it's a police service. The word force was removed deliberately because of what then it portends. Now, a service is basically an interactive engagement with the person that you serve. In fact, there have been near misses, and in fact misses by the police force in as far as the term service is concerned. There are times that they fail to serve the public and have mutilated the public and have killed members of the public when it shouldn't have happened in the first place. So then that's condemnable, and it must continue to be condemned. It's not the first time that we're having it. Historically, we've had it. So if the police force could have come with a statement about it and said, those that have broken the law within the police force, disciplinary action or action is going to be taken. That is what the public wants to hear. The engagement between the public and the police service has been as frictious as ever, on account of the fact that the police have not come out to engage the public positively on the incident that happened. Happening they did. But I think how you engage the public on the same and how you explain yourself to the public and the respective remedial measures that are going to be taken, I think, is what then is lacking.
Okay. Osen, we have to admit that we have a problem with the police service. It's no longer a force. And we have to look at it in the context of the general elections that has just concluded, and perhaps also borrow examples. The fact is, last week there was a general election in Honduras with almost similar level of protagonists. I mean, the incumbent and opposition. Yeah. And at a particular point, the Honduran police refused to take orders from the government, particularly where it was meant to meet force against supporters of the opposition. In Kenya, we have to also look at real incidences where perhaps this death occurred. One, Raila was coming back from United States. The question was how to use the airport, and then the rally to Uhuru Park or whatever. Was it any objective observer, whether Kenyan or a foreigner, was it necessary to use that level of force that the police deployed in stopping Raila from holding a rally, regardless of the venue? Was it not more objective? And by the way, it was covered all over in the international news, and in the process, everyone lost, because there's domino effect when people perceive you not to be peaceful. Was it not then wise to negotiate with the team, have, say, 1,000 people go to the airport, receive their leader, because you can't stop. Everyone knows that you can't stop anyone from going to the airport unless there's security risk, and this has to be very specific. 1,000 people going to the airport does not in any way qualify as security risk, particularly when, of course, other leaders have done that. So policing in Kenya, it's high time we acknowledge the policing in Kenya is not up to standard. And it is in very many ways subverting the gains that we've made in democracy, in democratization. And as you must have seen in Zimbabwe, that's really what kept Mugabe in power. And when security forces disengaged, that was the end of Mugabe. So what do we do next? I don't have easy solutions. This thing does not have easy solutions, and I don't have easy recommendations. But one thing is for sure, that whatever dialogue is going to take place must focus on the police, and particularly police brutality. Yeah. And two, because I come from a family where about 10 people are policemen, and some in the military. And two, this thing must focus on de-ethnicization of the police. You must have seen somewhere that literally all commanders in Nairobi, which is the epicenter of this violence, all commanders are perceived to come from tribes associated with President Kenyatta and his deputy, and that is not good.
You are asking a question whether it was necessary. I would want actually Kitty to respond to that.
Yes.
Whether it was necessary, what we saw, I mean, when Raila Odinga was coming from the US, the force we saw the police used that day. He's asking whether that was necessary.
Interesting question.
Sorry, why don't you begin by saying whether it was necessary to ban before then the force comes in, so that it tackles both?
Interesting question. The basic legal requirements for holding a procession and a rally were met. I had an occasion to talk with Advocate Sifuna, and it is his law firm that wrote to the relevant authorities that notifying them. So that was met. Now, as to whether it was a security risk for people to go to the airport, I do agree. I don't think we have millions of people in the airport to jam the airport when other business should go on. I think the arrangements, if had been made, yes, leadership and leaders of NASA, members of parliament, and the others could still have gone to receive him. Coming out of the airport, yes, they could have made their supporters, and the procession would have easily gone to Uhuru Park. Even in instances where there has been utmost palpable friction, a rally has been held at Uhuru Park, and it has been peaceful. In fact, after the rally, the police direct which are the exits.
Okay.
And that happens. So then, as to whether the force was necessary, I think, and I hold the position that it was completely uncalled for. If the force was directed towards mobilization of the path and the peaceful movement of the people towards the rally and after the rally, as has happened once in a while and before, then I think the result will have been different.
Dr. Mukwana, I'll come to you, but very briefly, yes. Dr. Komolo. I mean, the same way we saw and we see NASA saying, why doesn't the government recognize that there are people being killed and there's police brutality? It's the same way some in Jubilee are asking, why doesn't NASA also recognize that there are looters who take advantage of these demonstrations and there's destruction of property, which we have also witnessed?
Look, this is systemic profiling. And I'm not here to speak for NASA. For your information, in my earlier life, I attended several rallies in Uhuru Park and Eastlands and all that. There is an attempt to systemically profile protesters. Remember, there are protesters from both sides. And you can see, also when you are in this country, you can see when Jubilee supporters are protesting, it's peaceful, no disruption and all that. And when NASA protesters are there, it's obvious that there's an element of provocation. Is it necessary to support elements of criminal activities during this protest? Certainly not. But is it necessary, as we've just said about when Raila was coming back, is it really necessary to then, provoke them in the first place? Is it not then wise to have the necessary teams from both sides, including the police, engage with the organizers of these events to avoid these deaths? Because these deaths happen immediately after there's an element of provocation. Is it not wise to engage with the organizers, agree on the venue, agree on the details? What we have now, and this is not well highlighted, what we have now is an element of paranoia in government, including, taking human waste to a venue where, there's going to be a... Is that not open biasness?
Okay, Dr. Mukwana.
Thanks, Hussein. I want to strongly associate myself with the comments made by Councillor George with regard, number one, to whether it was right to ban the procession and the rally at Uhuru Park. He got it right. I don't think I need to belabor the point. It was absolutely unjustified. As to why, whether the force was commensurate or not, my answer is that force was not necessary in the first place. However, Hussein, I want to paint a bigger picture in what is happening in this country and the police specifically. Our police are very well trained. Our police are among the best rated in this world.
Really?
Yes, in terms of professionalism. Yes. The UN rates them very highly in terms of professionalism. The problem that is afflicting the police now is a political problem. The police command is being gradually politicized. Every time you see a police officer using a live bullet, using a baton, they act on instructions. An ordinary constable at the ground in Jacaranda or at Kasarani will not do a thing without the command. And therefore, for me, the bigger problem is that our political leaders in government seem to be politicizing the operations of the police force. That's number one. Number two, the police leadership, the IG and the police spokesperson, are doing a very bad job in terms of PR. If you listen to the IG and listen to police spokesperson, former spokesperson Owino, you get the feeling that they're replicating their predecessor during Moi's time. They are opaque, they don't take criticism, they don't respond to issues, and that's why my brother here says that they're not among the most objective. I want to say that the deaths that have occurred in this country, whether they are from Jubilee side, I don't know whether they're from Jubilee side or NASA side, but I know that people who have died in protests, it was completely unjustifiable. But I want to attribute that to the politicization of the police, because the police cannot take any action. In fact, I took the trouble to speak to one policeman who described the steps are taken normally when they go to crowd control. The use of a live bullet is the ultimate, and only in various circumstances. What we've seen is that there has been random use of live bullets. But Hussein, let me also say this. Looting of property is an excuse and ought not to be condoned. But this looting, many times from what you have seen, number one is the work of criminals who invade and infiltrate. But we say that the police can take care of. They need to work with organizers of the demonstration, and they can nip it in the bud. Because it is true that some criminal elements among either the opposition or the non-opposition could infiltrate. It is also true that the supporters some of the supporters take advantage, and that's not excusable. But when you see the police, for example, engaging in acts which are outright criminal, for example, when you see a policeman taking a stone and literally stoning a car, using their batons to actually vandalize the officials' cars, we're saying those are people who either have infiltrated the police service or their police service who are getting rogue instructions from their commanders.
Okay.
And
that we have to take a break. We have to take a break. Very briefly, okay, just very briefly.
Thank you. Hussein, you know why the discussion shall be this way and continue to be this way? is because there's a very big difference on the role of government and the role of opposition. The role of government is very well particularized in the Constitution, and it's not an easy thing, by the way. The role of opposition is purely to oppose, is purely to critic. So then you realize that it's very easy to be in the opposition, to say, to bring out the irritation that needs to be there for the government to be in check. When you're in government, notwithstanding the irritation, notwithstanding the insults, you must be beholden to the law. So then if you beat up a person, if you kill a person because he's being an irritant, he's being a nuisance, that's not allowed.
But ideally, professional should be beyond that.
That's the point. So when you get into government, you get into government, you must realize the role you're going to play is not the one of the opposition. In fact, it is to include in the opposition and protect the same people who are against you.
Okay. Osen, for 10 seconds, we need to set records straight. I don't know who is rating Kenya police, but from my international travels, I am very sure that what they're doing here, including normal interaction. One arrested me, I think, 2 weeks ago, based on a vehicle I've owned for 2 years, and alleging that, you know, the number plate is not right and all that. And then we went to his boss, and it was clear that he just wanted bribes. So, based on my international travels, Kenya police is not objective and very corrupt.
I hope he does. He didn't also allege you're a criminal, and we don't know.
Later, I realized that I'm, you know, a very obedient citizen, a lawyer in this country, and you know. I don't want to say more. Two, I think it is fair to admit that majority of those who have been killed by the police are NASA supporters, and in this particular case, Luos. I come from a place called Rangwe. I know for sure that police shot people, and we've buried people in Rangwe, including my own location. I think that saying that is not to say that, you know, the entire police force is bad, but to show that there has been a disproportionate use of force against people who are perceived to be against the government. And in this particular case, the Luos.
One last one, Hussein. The problem with the police must be seen as a general deterioration of the respect for the rule of law. It is not only about the deaths. Recently, Wangoso, the communication authority guy, issued an ultimatum to media houses not to televise live events, clearly contrary to the Constitution. Then the other day, David Ndei is arrested and access to the attorneys is restricted. We must know that even if it appears to be visited upon the opposition, it's not right. Just like if it will not be right if it is visited upon the pro-government people. The rule of law is slowly indicating a general decline, and the police must respect the rule of law.
I think they must be reformed. They will not reform themselves.
But again, Hussein, the police have that inevitable task. You know,
but there's no excuse, Wakili.
No, I'm not excusing it.
Yes.
I'm not excusing them.
Yes.
What needs to be done, I think, as a solution, is that if punishment is meted out visibly to the public for those that are perpetrators of the illegalities within the police force, the response by the public will not be what we are seeing now. Remember, crime will always be there, be it in the police force or any other sector. But those that do it must not be seen to be tolerated. I think action must be taken to be visibly seen, so that then we do know where justice falls.
Okay, we're taking a short break now on Citizen Extra. After the break, we'll be crossing over to Limuru, that is at the All-African Conference of Churches. That is in Westlands, actually. The Kenya Human Rights Commission holding the second People's Anti-Corruption International Anti-Corruption Day. That is what they'll be commemorating there. We'll be crossing over shortly. Plus, in Mombasa County, the Kenya Primary School Head Teachers Association conference, which is ending today. Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i